Vous parlez d'erreur de Lewis Hamilton. Comment on explique ce genre d'erreur avec un pilote aussi talentueux et avec autant d'expérience?
Je pense qu'il faut que je revoie la séance. La première, je pense qu'il est juste derrière Antonelli qui fait le tête à queue. Et je crois que c'est Tsunoda après qui passe dans la poussière. Et je pense que ça doit le déconcentrer parce qu'on voit un gros nuage de landboard et il doit la perdre comme ça. Et le deuxième, je pense qu'il est juste un peu agressif sur le frein.
What happens when a heptacampion in the world, one of the best pilots of all time, suffers an inexplicable spin and is eliminated in the first round of a classification? What if I told you that Ferrari could be hiding something much more serious behind what seems like a simple driving error? Stay, because what Fred Vasseur revealed completely changes the narrative. The sprint qualifying session, which is normally an opportunity for pilots to mark their territory for Saturday, became a nightmare for Hamilton in the circuit where it has shown countless times. From the first sector, something did not square. His times were discreet, the car did not respond, and the general sensation was that it was not in tune with the SF25. But no one imagined the brutal outcome that was to come. The final blow came in the chicane of the bus stop, an area that is normally dominated with a progressive brake and a lot of change precision. There, suddenly, the rear axle of his Ferrari was completely blocked, sending the car to a spin that left him off track. The cameras captured him in the midst of that uncontrollable turn, and what most alarmed the engineers was the fact that Hamilton did nothing extraordinary at that time. There was no visible error. There was no compromised path. Only a car that simply stopped working properly. When the telemetric data were reviewed, the pattern was clear. The SF25 had a rear axle block that did not correspond to the pilot's input. That is, Hamilton stopped as always, but the car reacted anomalously. To that is added the declaration of Lewis himself, visibly dejected after the session, saying that he had never experienced such a blockade in his entire career. A phrase that, in any other pilot, could sound like an exaggeration. But not coming from who has played more than 330 large awards and has tried almost all generations of modern cars. What was lived in the mixed area later was almost more revealing than the incident on the track. Hamilton, usually a communication teacher in media management, barely articulated a few phrases. His tone was flat. His gaze lost. There was not the slightest hint of competitive rabies or criticism of Ferrari, not even self-criticism. Only a mute desolation, difficult to digest even for those who do not support it. At that moment, Paddock knew something was wrong. Very badly. And to understand why this represents a critical point in this season's narrative, you have to observe the context. Ferrari came from promising a revolutionary car with the SF25, a car that should be the definitive quality jump after a 2024 campaign in which they were very close to the title of builders. With the arrival of Hamilton, the goal was none other than winning. But what we saw in Spa was not just a car that does not meet expectations. It was a car that betrays its pilot. And that is exactly what makes this act so dramatic. We are not talking about a human error, a bad day, or a recall in classification. We are witnessing a deep disconnection between pilot and machine. A distrust that, if not corrected in time, can become a descending spiral difficult to reverse. Because when a pilot like Lewis Hamilton, accustomed to millimeter control and technical domain, loses faith in his work tool, the entire project Familia, this was the unexpected disaster. Not only because of the result itself, but for everything that represents symbolically. Ferrari not only left out his main triumph letter in a sprint, he showed that his car can fail in the most crucial moments. And that, in a season where McLaren, Mercedes and Red Bull do not forgive, is a sentence that can cost very expensive. Once the sprint qualifying and digested session is completed, the initial shock due to the elimination of Hamilton, questions between journalists, engineers and analysts began to circulate. Was it really a piloting error? A concentration of someone with more than 300 races in their history? Soon, the first responses began to emerge and pointed to a very different direction. It wasn't Hamilton who had failed. It was the car. The investigation began where it always begins in these cases. Telemetry and data of the power unit and the gearbox. And it was quickly confirmed that there was something abnormal in the SF25 braking pattern. But the most enlightening came when Anthony Davidson, former Formula One pilot and reputed Sky Sports technical analyst, requested to review the internal audio of the car during the tour of the incident. What he listened froze his blood. This type of failure is not only rare but dangerous, because it implies that the transmission system does not correctly synchronize the revolutions by reducing marches, which can cause a transference of uncontrolled torque to the rear axle. In simple words, the car pushes the wheels in the opposite direction to the desired one in full braking, as if a second invisible pilot sabotaged the maneuver. For any pilot, even one of Hamilton's caliber, it is impossible to react on time. The spin is inevitable. This finding completely changed the narrative inside the paddock. He was not a pilot in decline. It was a technical structure that had failed to provide a reliable car. And that is devastating for any team, but especially for Ferrari, an organization that had been building its technical redemption after years of strategic errors. Spa not only represented a punctual failure, but a deep crack in mutual confidence between the star pilot and the team that opted for him. Some hypotheses point to a possible thermal fatigue accumulated in the gearbox after Friday's training. Others suggest poor calibration in the motor brake system combined with the energy recovery of the ERS, which could have generated an imbalance in the rear axle at the time of the downshift. There is even talk of a software failure that would have delayed torque cut during braking, generating an overload that resulted in the blockade. Because a car that cannot guarantee mechanical consistency in a critical phase such as braking cannot compete for titles. It is a structural weakness. And for a pilot like Hamilton, who bases his piloting on extreme sensitivity on the input phases to curve, having a car that does not always respond the same is the closest to the technical chaos. The situation is aggravated when we remember that Spa-Francorchamps is not any circuit. It is one of the most demanding paths of the calendar, with fast curves, aggressive braking and technical transitions that punish poorly configured transmission systems. The fact that the ruling has been manifested there can only be the tip of the iceberg, revealing a weakness that is exposed under extreme stress. And that forces Ferrari to react immediately. What happened with Hamilton in this sprint classification was not just a strange accident. It was a direct warning that there is something deeply broken on SF25. And that, if not corrected, could cost much more than an early elimination. Could cost the season. Vasseur, with his usual openness mixed with diplomacy, made it clear that what happened was not what they expected, but more importantly, that Hamilton's potential performance was well above the final result. Lewis had a rhythm to pass without problems. In his first attempt he went 6 or 7 tenths ahead of Charles. That phrase is not a comfort, it is a confirmation. He records that the car was being competitive, until it ceased to be. Internally, this type of incidents generate structural tensions, because not only the car's performance is questioned, but also the team's ability to protect its star pilot. In a team like Ferrari, where technical decisions are often policies and each action is analyzed with magnifying glass, an episode like Spa can have deep ramifications. The credibility of the technical department is questioned. Hamilton's trust is affected, and the stability of the long-term project begins to stagger. In addition, there is a symbolic component that cannot be ignored. Ferrari signed Lewis Hamilton not only for his speed, but for his reputation, his leadership, his ability to guide a team in crisis towards redemption. It was a blow of media and sports effect. But if the team cannot offer a car at the height of its ambition, that alliance can fracture much earlier than expected. And here the strategic dilemma appears. How does Ferrari respond to this crisis without a desperate movement? Because if the SF25 gearbox has a structural defect, it is not enough to change components. A complete review of the design, control software, mechanical tolerances, and even the way in which the data interprets in real time is needed. It is a high-risk surgical intervention, and must be done with the championship in progress. What is at stake now is not only the next classification, not even the career result. It is Hamilton's trust. It is Vasseur's credibility. It is the entire Ferrari 2025, which promised to be the year of the final resurrection. And that, by a series of chained errors, it can end as another unfinished story in the long list of recent disappointments of the Scuderia. What happened in Spa was not just a bad day in the office. It was, for many inside and outside the paddock, a silent warning that Ferrari is entering dangerous territory. Because when a structure like the Scuderia fails to deliver reliability, precision and protection to its most valuable pilot, we are not talking only about sports loss. We are talking about a fracture in the promise on which the entire 2025 project was built. Lewis Hamilton came to Ferrari not to complete his career, but to rewrite his legacy. This stage was not an elegant retreat disguised as competition. It was a bold bet to close his career where the legend of Formula One, in the house of Enzo Ferrari, began, in everyone's most emblematic team. But that bet was based on a tacit agreement, that Ferrari would be ready to deliver a car worthy of his ambition. And so far that pact seems to be cracking. The big question is, are you willing to assume that level of self-criticism? Is Vasseur prepared to dismantle what is necessary within the SF25 and in the team culture to rebuild on new bases? Because if you don't, this will not be just a low point in the season. He will be remembered as the moment when Ferrari let out, once again, the opportunity to be great again. The future is suspended in a tense rope. On the other hand, there are McLaren, Mercedes, and Red Bull, sharpening every detail without visible errors, capitalizing at every weakness. Meanwhile, Ferrari must make a decision. Continue paddling with a ship that makes water in the gearbox, or rebuild the helmet from within and navigate finally with the wind in favor? Because this point, Spa 2025, can be one of two things: the beginning of a fall without return, or the beginning of a legendary comeback. And that depends not on Ferrari's past history, but on what they are willing to do from today.